Welcome to our podcast where we argue various topics. I'm Ben, joined by my friends Zach and Jason. Jason has come up with a variety of prompts, and we will go back and forth and argue and debate various topics relating to anything from pop culture to politics to society, whatever we have interests and opinions about. So, without further ado, let's have Jason introduce us to our first debate topic.
Okay. So, the first prompt is, what is the best movie released before 1950?
Casablanca.
I'll say Citizen Kane. It's kind of the Citizen Kane of movies.
So the reason Casablanca is the best movie released before 1950 is because it's a story we can all relate to. It's a story that is essentially about love and about loss, and how we respond to when we realize that sometimes it is better to just let something that we really, really want, it's better to just let that go, because trying to pursue that thing is no longer good for us, and it's no longer good for whatever we're trying to pursue. So to give a little bit of context, in the movie Casablanca, you have this character played by Humphrey Bogart. His name is Rick Blaine. Rick Blaine was dating a woman. I don't exactly remember what her name is because it's not said. It's been a while since I watched Casablanca, so I don't remember what Ingrid Bergman's character's name is. But we find out over the course of the movie, because at the beginning of the movie, Rick Blaine has this bar in Casablanca. This movie set during World War II, set in 1940, like the early 40s. It came out in 1942. Rick Blaine has this bar in Casablanca, which is a city in Morocco, and a woman, played by Ingrid Bergman, who we find out over the course of the movie that he had dated and he'd had a romantic relationship with, shows up in this bar, and the course of the movie, you see Rick be really conflicted about, do I pursue this woman again? Do I need to let her go? Do I need to move on with my life? And it's further complicated by the fact that when the woman shows up in the bar, she is dating a guy who is a resistance fighter against the Nazis, and over the course of the movie, Rick helps them escape from Casablanca, and at the very end of the movie, he has this choice of, do I win the woman back because she's willing to go back with him, or do I tell her to go with her freedom fighter new dude? And he tells her to go because he realizes it would be better for both of them if they moved on and they started new lives. So I think Casablanca can tell us something about ourselves, and that is as hard as it can be. And no matter how much we want something, if the pursuit of that thing has become destructive in and of itself, and has started to have a negative impact on our lives, then we need to be okay with letting that thing go. And the end of Casablanca is Rick realizing he needs to let her go, and he needs to stop being upset about how that situation turned out, and he needs to put his life back together. And he makes a friendship with Louis, who was the French guy who went against the Nazis also. And then you get one of the best lines in the end, one of the best ending lines in the history of cinema, when he says, "Louis, I think that's the beginning of a wonderful friendship." Casablanca 2 would have been a great sequel. We could have seen what fun adventures Rick and Louis got up to as French resistance fighters against the Nazis. So yeah, Casablanca, best movie released since 1950, arguably the best movie of all time.
Okay. Yeah, so both the movies we picked are from the early 40s, and both of them, are like, if you see any list of the best movies of all time, both of these will probably be in the top 5. So and I haven't seen either of these in a long time. I've seen both of them, but it's been a long time. So Citizen Kane is almost kind of a cliche, because it was voted the best movie of all time by the Film Academy, I think. But the story of the movie, it's by Orson Welles, directed and starred in it, and it's kind of based on the life of William Randolph Hearst to some degree, but it's this character, Charles Foster Kane, is this kind of larger than life megalomaniac yellow journalist who builds this huge empire and has all kinds of success, but kind of alienates everyone around him, and eventually retires to Xanadu, this amazing palatial home that he's made for himself, and kind of dies alone and broken there. And it's told in kind of a unique way where you have like things that are kind of being told and looking back at various portions of his life over the course of the movie, and kind of trying to understand some of the mystery around this larger than life figure. And so it's, a kind of a poignant tale of someone having all this ambition and drive, and in one way being a great person, but in another way having this broken and empty life. And kind of the difference between like you want to make something of your life and do great things, but like you kind of don't know what's truly important as you're doing it. And then also like the cinematography is incredible, and the storytelling techniques, like it pioneered a lot of things that would be used in later films, of like the non-linear storytelling and the different camera angles and different lighting techniques and things, and was really important in kind of film was still a pretty young medium at that time, and still only a couple decades old. And so this was very influential in the development of just how people told stories over film too. So both of these are incredible films, but Citizen Kane, it is the Citizen Kane of movies.
I will offer a few minor criticisms of Citizen Kane, because it is fairly hard to criticize Citizen Kane. A major thing I've heard when people argue against Citizen Kane is that because it was anointed as the best movie of all time for so long, it's become kind of overrated over the years, which I don't necessarily feel that way, because, when something gets picked as the best thing of all time, it's usually picked that for a reason, and Citizen Kane is a really good movie. My criticisms of Citizen Kane are that, one, it drags it a little bit now, because, like, yes, it was very pioneering at the time, but it's maybe a little bit too long. And sometimes the frame story of you finding out, like, what is Rosebud? And sometimes some of the nonlinear storyline doesn't necessarily work as well as you would want it to at certain times. Like, it's a really interesting story, and it's really, really well acted, but it just isn't as grabbing in 2020 as it probably was in the 1930s. And another criticism I would have of it, comparing it to specifically Casablanca, especially right now, if you want to watch a movie right now, Casablanca is an uplifting story about realizing your shortcomings and realizing that sometimes you just need to let things go and you need to move on with your life. And that once you realize that you can do that, you can become a better person, and you can learn and you can grow. Citizen Kane is a movie about how someone's short-sighted ambition drove them to madness and loneliness, and all the money in the world didn't matter because Charles Foster Kane died completely alone. And in the world we live in right now, that's maybe not the best message that you want to get from a movie. So I think at a lot of other times, Citizen Kane is perfectly fine. But I would say right now, if you're watching a movie right now, specifically right now, and because with greatest of all time lists, in a lot of ways, it's completely dependent on the context in which the list was made, the context of the time in which the list was made. And the context of the time right now is you don't want to watch a movie about being a dreary shut-in that everybody hated because your single-minded ambition led to you driving every single person in your life away from you. Because the saddest parts of Citizen Kane are when you see him with his wife that he is forcing to try to be an opera singer, and it's just sad because she doesn't want to do it, but he is forcing her to do it. He's basically abusing her, mentally abusing her, but she doesn't leave him because he's rich. And it's like, that just plays really, really poorly in 2020. So because of that, I don't think Citizen Kane necessarily holds up as well, but that's a problem with a lot of movies from the 30s and 40s, is that there is stuff in those movies that was fine back then, but is a really, really bad look in 2020. And that stuff in particular, just it plays so badly now that I would say that Casablanca is a better movie than Citizen Kane, but it is very difficult to criticize Citizen Kane.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's it's also very hard to criticize Casablanca. I will say, like, at least with some of the troubling things, like, regarding the relationship with his wife and others, that, at least with Citizen Kane, it's not like some problematic movies from that time where it's making out to be like, oh yeah, this person was fine and did all these horrible things. It's like, no, this was a horrible person that was doing this horrible shit. He's not a role model in any way. And also, like, I think as far as the times we're in, like, yeah, I mean, I would be more inclined to watch a happy, a movie that made me feel good. But I know a lot of people are kind of like, well, I'm pissed off. I kind of want to watch something that, like, matches my pessimistic mood, but that doesn't have the same consequences because it's not the real world. Yeah, I don't know. Like with Casablanca, it's like, yeah, there's very little to criticize there. And like I said, it's been a little too long since I've watched either of these to go that far in depth with them. I think in both cases, like, there's, they pretty much do every aspect right. Like, the screenplay is incredible. The performances are fantastic. The cinematography is wonderful. Like, like watching both of these, I think they hold up wonderfully. So I don't really have anything to knock yours, only to praise my choice.
No, I don't. I feel like I've said everything I need to say.
So yeah, two really good choices, and you both knew enough about the movies to argue them effectively. I'm going to say that Zach won. I do think, based upon the descriptions, Casablanca sounds like the better movie to be declared best of all time, or best of before 1950. I disagree slightly with a bit of the points Zach made about, like, when you're saying that, like, it was very convincing, the idea that, like, you have to decide, is this thing that I want still worth it? Or is it counterproductive? I do think love triangles are very common, and that's not quite as novel as you made it out to be. But yeah, that is a very, in a very compelling time, that sounds like a great story. I have seen Citizen Kane, but I haven't seen Casablanca. For Ben's point, or for Ben's argument, I definitely like the idea of, like, hey, you can have all of this ambition, but if you don't realize what's important in life, like, that can really come back to bite you. I think that's an incredibly important message that a lot of people need to hear, unfortunately, even in times when things are otherwise depressing. But yeah, very well argued. But I'm going to give this one to Zach.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, he's obviously has both of these better in his mind at the moment than I do. And honestly, if I was going to watch one of the two, I would also want to watch Casablanca, but they're both really, really good.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I really thought about arguing for It Happened One Night, but there's just a lot of stuff in It Happened One Night that is just such a bad look in 2020 that if you can put it in the context of this movie came out in the 30s, then it's like, okay, it totally makes sense that this is arguably the best comedy movie of all time. But it's really bad in 2020 when Clark Gable is just saying, someone should put a sock to her once a day, whether she deserves it or not. Like, that's really bad in 2020. Like, no, you're literally joking about abuse. Like, what?
Yep, and it's so much harder with comedies because things change. Because you're trying to be a little bit edgy, and things change so quickly as to what's acceptable or not.
I mean, I would probably still argue that It Happened One Night is the best comedy movie of all time, but if someone came at me with that argument, that, like, if someone outside of, like, Ben came at me with that argument, I would have no idea how to respond to that, because it's just, like, all you can say is, well, it was the 30s, and things were different in the 30s, but that is such a shitty response to that.
Uh-huh.
Well, yeah, I mean,
because if it...
Yeah, I wouldn't really use that argument, because it's like, yeah, you can use that argument, but it's kind of a cheat code, and it's kind of facile. Like, it doesn't really engage with the film in terms of the quality with which it's made. It just kind of uses the changes in perception since then in a way that, like, doesn't really isn't very illuminating, I think. I mean, because I probably, if we were arguing best comedy, like, you know, one of my top choices would be The Apartment, and for the most part it's way ahead of his time, but there is a sequence where, like, the doctor who is you know, trying to wake this woman up from well, I won't spoil why, but you know, basically slaps her in the face multiple times, and it's like, ooh, that's really rough to watch.
Yep.
So, Zach, you get to pick the category. We have entertainment, politics, and technology.
Oh, Jesus. Entertainment, I guess.
Okay. What is the most overrated book?
Most overrated book. Wow. Okay. There are a lot of good options here. Oh, God, that would be Healy. That would be really Healy. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to try to resist. But God, that'd be such. That would be quite the heel turn if I could argue that and win.
So, I'm going to throw one down. Mice and Men.
Ben, do you have one immediately to save me from myself here? Because I have a really, really Healy one, but I don't know if I necessarily want to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm having trouble because, like, I know there's, like, some good options, but, like, nothing that, like, comes to mind of, like, I actually read it and know enough about it to have a good argument.
Okay, fine. I'll go full heel. The Bible.
Yep, I knew it.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were going. Okay.
I mean, it just has to be.
So the reason why Mice and Men is the most overrated book of all time, or I didn't put all time in the prompt, but just most overrated book, is because it points out a problem but does nothing to even hint at a solution, let alone imagine that a solution is even possible. So it is the fundamental, like, depressing, the world is unfixable book. And it's held up as, like, this great piece of the canon literature that, like, everyone should read in high school. And I get that, like, it's a story that's interesting. I could say it's a good book, I mean, in its own way. But, like, I don't think it's like, oh, this definitely has to be taught in high school. This is one of the exemplars of world literature. Not in the slightest. Like, in Mice and Men, you have these two farm workers who are going from farm to farm, and one of them is very big and mentally retarded, essentially. And he ends up accidentally killing someone, not because he's malicious, but just because it was an accident, and, you know, he really didn't understand his own strength. And a mob comes to kill him, and his friend Mercy kills him before the mob can get to him, knowing that, like, he'd be better off if he was happy in his final moments rather than terrified. And I mean, it very much points to like, yeah, just how fragile life is as a farm worker during the Depression and the Dust Bowl, and that there's you just have no material support, and you just have to get by on your own. And if you have someone who has special needs, like that one farm worker, I believe his name was Lenny, did, then you just can't have a life because the social supports you need just don't exist. And the book does absolutely nothing to say like, hey, maybe we should have social programs to take care of people like this, or maybe we need to have social workers who come and help people like this out. There's none of that. There's not even a contemplation that that's even a possibility. It's just, oh, the world sucks. It's so far beyond our ability to fix that we can't even entertain a way that it can be better. And it's when you finish the book, you're just like, why did I read this? And I guess, I mean, it's a kind of a compelling story, but to what end? And
okay,
yeah.
Oh, keep going.
So
I'm actually. Oh, go ahead. All right. So I'm actually going to change my pick because okay. I looked at my bookshelf and I saw a book that I read about a year ago when I was really, really like reading heavily again. And this book is by an author who is held up as one of the great authors of American literature. And this book was so unbelievably painful to get through, and it's considered one of his best, and I just don't get it. I really, really don't get it. And that is As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. Because usually people have a lot of trouble with The Sound and the Fury, which I understand because Quentin's POV in Sound and the Fury can be really hard to read, but it's actually very fascinating because Quentin's POV pretty accurately portrays somebody who is going insane. So his thoughts are scattered, they're all over the place. You don't know what he's thinking from one time to the next. He can't form a coherent thought together. Like, yeah, it's really tough to read, but it's super, super compelling because it's like, okay, this is this guy going insane. This is amazing that Faulkner actually perfectly captured this in these pages. And like, I was really compelled, and I kept wanting to read and read and read and read. And I thought, oh, this is great. Faulkner's awesome. Why do so many people hate Faulkner? And then I read As I Lay Dying, and I was like, oh, yeah, because this is 300 pages of nothing happening. Nothing happening. It is so blindingly boring that it makes you want to never read another book again and set all the books you have on fire. Because nothing happens. There is this one chapter that's like 5 words that says, my mother was a fish. And that's one of the chapters. And yeah, thankfully, some of the chapters are kind of short, but the frame narrative of the entire story is that this woman dies, and her family gets on a bunch of misadventures, taking her to where she is going to be buried because she wants to be buried somewhere else because I guess that's the thing that happened. So, and this is considered one of Faulkner's best books. Well, The Sound and the Fury, I get why some people don't like The Sound and the Fury. It is really hard to read. But if you recognize it for what it is and you're like, oh, this is actually really, really interesting and really, really compelling, it's an amazing story. Whereas As I Lay Dying is just 300 pages of slow, painful death where nothing happens and you want to gouge your eyes out of your head and throw them against the wall and slowly die just so you don't have to finish it. It is awful. It is considered one of the pantheon books of American history. Like, yeah, of Mice and Men, yeah, the world is bleak and there is no hope, but that's actually kind of realistic for some people because some people do live in a world where it seems like everything is bleak and there is no hope and I don't see how it's going to get better. So that actually kind of speaks to the human experience for some people and in some way. And Of Mice and Men is actually really well written because Steinbeck is a good author. So even though it's not necessarily the most fascinating, gripping story, you at least keep reading it because it's well written. As I Lay Dying is a terrible story that is poorly written. And it's like, how did the same guy that wrote The Sound and the Fury, which is an amazing, one of the best books in American literature, write this piece of shit? So yeah, As I Lay Dying, most overrated book of all time. It is unreadably bad. It is unreadably bad.
Okay.
And I was way more passionate about that than I ever could have been about the Bible. So that is why I changed my pick. As soon as I saw it on my shelf, I remembered exactly how much I hated that.
right, and it's more of an apples to apples comparison versus comparing literature to the cornerstone of your religion.
Because my argument against the Bible would have been that people have done really terrible things in the name of the Bible and don't actually follow the tenets that are listed in the Bible despite claiming to be good Christians. And then I'm not really comparing it as a piece of literature. I'm just complaining about how messed up organized religion is. Whereas As I Lay Dying, I can rip that for being a shitty piece of literature. Okay.
So,
go ahead, Jason.
So I have not read As I Lay Dying, so I can't critique it. Yeah.
Trust me.
But one reason why I think Of Mice and Men is more overrated is that more people have heard of it. I mean, like, it is traditionally taught in high schools, and I've heard of Faulkner. I've never read any Faulkner. I haven't heard about any specifics of his books, and so while I'm sure among literature geeks, Faulkner is exalted, as you say, I didn't know enough of him to know his reputation, other than I've heard the name before. So I think that Mice and Men has more of a reputation to debate rather than Faulkner, who I think fewer people have heard of. I wouldn't necessarily say Mice and Men is without merit. I mean, I'm not saying it's an actively bad book, but that I wouldn't say that it's one of the best books in the literature canon that like every high schooler should read. And I mean, I guess, with the right teacher, you can kind of do a good job kind of navigating some of these things. But so much of the larger issues the books raises, it doesn't even try to address in any helpful way. It's just that, no, this is just helpless and pointless. And to me, that's just not
that's
good.
That's also kind of the book, because that's also kind of the point, because at that time the book that book came out and was written in the time that it was portraying, there weren't really any helpful ways to address those issues that they were facing. So that book is a good representation of the hopelessness of the situation that those guys were in.
I mean, like,
it's like, yeah, the resources that you're talking about just didn't exist, or were not easily accessible. So
right.
if those resources had been easily accessible, that might have seemed a bit disingenuous. And
right.
and that story that came out in the 40s, I think it's from the 40s. Because I think it's more an allegory of the hopelessness of the Great Depression.
Well, sure. But like, as someone who spent a lot of time thinking about social problems, as a reporter and as just someone who's a citizen following the news, to me it seems exceptionally irresponsible to lay out a horrible problem and spend absolutely no time thinking about solutions. And it's like, okay, you have everyone's attention. You have thoroughly convinced us that this is a problem that we need to deal with. And it's just like the goal is just to depress people with nothing else. And like that, to me, that's a waste of energy. You got people to care and then didn't do anything with it. Like it's almost like you're training people not to care about things because you're trying to convince them they can't be fixed. And yeah, so, and again, which isn't to say that it's not a compelling story or it wasn't well told. Obviously it was, and Steinbeck is good at what he does in terms of crafting narrative. But fundamentally, all works of literature exist in a larger social context, and having, works that point out social problems without trying to marshal people's attention, which you now have, to try to actually help, to me is not productive. So that's why I think Of Mice and Men is the most overrated book.
And you mention the social context, but you're forgetting that the social context of when that book came out was the Great Depression, and And there were not solutions to those problems that he mentioned. And that book is a perfect representation of what life during the Great Depression was like. So you read that book in a high school class as one of the great canons of American literature, because that book is a perfect representation of a long period and of an important period in American history. Whereas As I Lay Dying doesn't really serve any purpose outside of, yeah, it's a story of the South, kind of, but there are so many other better representations of the South in literature, like The Sound and the Fury is 100% better than As I Lay Dying. But As I Lay Dying is held up as one of Faulkner's 2 or 3 best novels, and one of, like, the 100 greatest novels ever in American literature, and nothing happens. Just nothing happens. It's not, the story isn't compelling, and the characters aren't compelling. You're not cheering for them to actually make it to the end and to accomplish their goal. You're just glad when it's over, because it's been terrible. Whereas in Of Mice and Men, you actually connect to the characters, and you feel the society that they're living in, and you understand the hopelessness that they're feeling, because they're during the Great Depression there was no reason for hope for a lot of people, and you totally get that through those characters. And I don't think necessarily what we read in high school is considered to be the great canon of American literature, because if it was, we would read a lot more than just the same 3 or 4 books that everybody reads. So, yeah, a lot more people have been exposed to Of Mice and Men, but a lot more people have been exposed to Of Mice and Men because Of Mice and Men is a lot more important. Whereas As I Lay Dying is held up way beyond what it's held up in the canon of American literature, way beyond what it should be for what it is.
So just because you live in a time where solutions to a problem doesn't exist, doesn't mean you can't invent them or envision what they might be. And I think that is a lack of imagination that, fundamentally, is not necessarily shared by other authors. There was the famous socialist who wrote about the guy who, in a fictional book, fell into the vat of whatever he was producing in a factory. I think it was called The Jungle. And yeah, his solution was socialism. And we can debate the merits of his solution, but at least he tried to come up with an idea of what to do.
But what you're missing is that the Jungle came out in the mid-20s before the Great Depression hit. Of Mice and Men came out in the middle of the Great Depression, where there was so little hope. It was really hard to have an imagination, because your entire life was just getting by and hopefully surviving to the next day. I don't fault Steinbeck for not thinking up magical solutions out of nowhere, because people didn't want that. They wanted to read something that was an accurate representation of their life, and thinking of some magical solutions of how we're going to fix the Great Depression doing this, this, and this would have seemed really disingenuous to those readers who were living in a time of 25% unemployment and numerous other terrible things. And if you lived in the Midwest, you couldn't grow crops because of the weather, and not that much different than 2020, except for not having a dust bowl.
Yeah.
The Great Depression was also the era of the New Deal and a lot of novel solutions to social problems. That is where we get Social Security, from the New Deal era of reforms. And the federal government was coming up with all sorts of programs. It wouldn't be a stretch to say that we could come up with something to deal with the mentally handicapped who are needing assistance in employment. That's just not outside the realm of possibility at all.
Okay, so
I've probably said all I'm going to say here.
Okay. Yeah, so that was a pretty interesting discussion. So, first, before I render my judgment, just the fact that Jason picked something from the high school English class canon made me think of another book that I wouldn't say is, I'm not, it's not relevant to this argument, because I'm not saying this book is overrated, but To Kill a Mockingbird, I think it's a very good book, but it's funny just how much people fixate on that. And I just wanted to bring up the point that a lot of people name their kid Scout these days, and it's it's okay, but it's like if you're naming your kid Scout, it's really obvious where you got that from. And whenever I hear that someone named their kid after someone that obviously came from a book that was required reading in high school, my thought is you're basically saying I'm at least somewhat smart and well read, but I still peaked in high school.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't think of anything that spoke to me more than something I was forced to read in high school.
God, and speaking of something else from the high school canon, I could have gone with Huck Finn, but I didn't. I just didn't enjoy Huck Finn. I didn't absolutely hate Huck Finn the way I hated As I Lay Dying.
Okay, but anyway, so my judgment on this is like, I think Jason's argument was really interesting, but I have to go with Zach here because I think the problems he described with the novel As I Lay Dying are more fundamental. Oh, and by the way, I looked up when both of these came out. So Of Mice and Men was 1937 and As I Lay Dying is 1930. But like, I think like Jason has an interesting interpretation of like, that a book should offer a solution and not just be depressing. And like, yeah, if something that is just depressing, like, can be a drag, but like, I think the idea that things should offer a solution is something that's more specific to Jason's specific attitudes, and like, not everyone would agree with that. Whereas like, I think everyone would agree with Zach that when they're reading a novel, they want a novel that where things happen and you can like keep track of like what's going on, and it's not just super boring and frustrating to get through. So and also his passion in his opening argument was very strong.
So I will quickly Wikipedia to see where this is ranked. Okay, let's see here. As I Lay Dying in 1998 was ranked as the 35th best novel, English language novel of the 20th century. Like, no, As I Lay Dying sucks. It's just awful. It's painful. Painful.
Yeah, I haven't like forced myself all the way through a book like that, but it kind of reminds me of when I tried to read The House of the Seven Gables, because like the first 20 pages where they have like some backstory is kind of interesting, but then in the next 100 pages, like basically all that happens is this woman wakes up, she goes downstairs and has breakfast, she sells somebody something in her shop, and then she has a conversation with her tenant in the backyard. That is 100 pages. Nothing happens. It's like reading paint dry, and you're...
Yeah.
And so I just gave up at that point because I was like, well, I'm doing this. I'm a high school student. I'm doing a program where I have to read 12 books a year. I'm never going to get through this fucking book.
Yep. This is painful.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Well, I guess I will wade into politics for the next category.
Okay. So our next prompt is, who would be the best person for Biden to pick as his running mate? And I'm going to say Nina Turner.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if this is actually constitutional, but it's got to just be Barry.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead, Jason. I've accepted that I'm probably going to lose this argument, but I feel like the world needs more Barry, so I'm going to argue for Barry.
Okay, you realize I will be arguing the unconstitutional point, so.
I don't give a shit, Jason. I'm fucking arguing for Barry anyway. The Constitution doesn't matter anymore in Trump's America.
Okay.
I assume here that even though it would be logical for you to be arguing Barack Obama, that you're actually going to be arguing for the fictional character played by Bill Hader, and that it's unconstitutional because he's a fictional character.
Something along those lines, yes.
Yes.
So Nina Turner is a black woman who served in the Ohio State Senate. I'm pretty sure it was Ohio. Before being a surrogate for the Bernie Sanders campaign in 2016 and serving as the Sanders National Campaign co-chair in 2020. She is someone who is a dyed-in-the-wool progressive. She vocally supports Medicare for all, as well as free college, the abolition of student debt and medical debt, and taking on and resolving systemic racism and bigotry in America. So she's not afraid to take specific positions. She is beloved by the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, second only to Bernie Sanders himself. And to the extent that you have stragglers, as there have been among the progressive left in, being concerned about Biden, many of them say that, hey, if he chooses a progressive vice president, specifically Sanders or Turner, that, hey, he's got my vote. And it's much more important for Biden to unite the Democratic Party because of the divides ideologically within the party than it is to try to win over swing voters. I think he needs to do both. But you definitely can do the swingy moderate voters kind of like Biden to begin with. The progressives need extra convincing. And so Nina Turner would be great for that. Biden has already promised to nominate a female vice president, which limits his choices. But Nina Turner fits that bill. And in the wake of these massive protests concerning police brutality and harsh treatment of African Americans by police, Nina Turner would be the perfect person to navigate that because she speaks very eloquently about her experiences as a black woman. And she hasn't said anything in response to the current crisis that is either alienating to the protesters or alienating to moderate, reasonable people who don't want to completely eliminate law enforcement in this country. And so she has been able to walk the line and not lose any support of a very difficult issue that really needs to have representation in the administration, if not on the ticket itself. So that's ultimately why I think Nina Turner would be the best person for Biden to choose as his vice presidential candidate.
All I have to say in defense of my pick of why the world needs more berries is it worked for 8 years, so why not just run it back for 4 more? And you can come at me with it's unconstitutional. You can look at all of the numerous things that Trump has done that has been unconstitutional, like refusing to put his businesses in a private trust, and his just blatant nepotism and giving Ivanka so much crap to do and having Don Jr. do numerous things. The Trump administration and just the government in general doesn't respect the Constitution anymore. So why should Biden give us Obama? People like Obama. Obama is still a unifying figure for a lot of people. Why not just coast on the popularity? Because Obama's popularity went up dramatically when he was out of office because people realized, oh yeah, God, Trump is terrible. And Obama was a good president that we actually enjoyed having around. So if you have Obama as the vice president, you can coast on that popularity, and he'll also speak to some bases. And it would be kind of funny if Obama got to shoot Trump out of the White House. I don't actually have a good pick for this because I don't know who Biden should pick for his vice president because I'm going to vote for him anyway. So I was going to lose this argument from the beginning, but I just think it would be kind of funny if it's kind of a fuck you to the Republicans if Obama and Biden ran it back for 4 more years and is it worked for 8 years, let's go for 8 more.
So yeah, the president is term limited in the Constitution for 2 terms. The vice president becomes president if the president is incapacitated. You don't want your backup ineligible to serve because then I guess the secretary, the Speaker of the House, then just even if it's from another party.
But this is a thing that's never happened before. So would the being vice president and being elevated to the position take out the ineligibility, because you can only be elected to 2 terms. It doesn't say you can't serve more than 2 terms, right? It just stops you from standing for election for a 3rd time, right?
I guess I'm going to look up the statute.
I think if you were elevated through other means, you would still be fine. It just would be like Obama can't then run for another term after that. I don't know. I don't actually know how it works. I am curious though if he was vice president or like Speaker of the House or something, if he had already served multiple terms as president, could he become president again if he came up in the chain, if he came up in the line of succession?
Okay, according to Wikipedia, the 22nd Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, no person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice, and no person who has held the office of president or acted as president for more than 2 years of a term to which some other person was elected shall be elected to the office of the president more than once. But this article shall not apply to any person holding the office of president when this article is proposed by the Congress, and shall not prevent any person who may be holding the office of president or acting as president during the term within which this article becomes operative, unless from holding the office of president or acting as president during the remainder of such term. This article shall be inoperative unless it shall have been ratified, blah, 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 blah. Which, of course, it was. And okay, I guess technically, according to the text of the amendment, it is pertaining only to standing for election. So I guess, based upon a textual reading, that wouldn't be precluded.
Technically correct is the best kind of correct, Jason. Technically correct.
So the reason why Barack Obama himself wouldn't agree to this arrangement is because, one, it does fly in the face of the spirit of the law, if not the letter of the law, and that's generally not something Obama has wanted to do. Often in the ways in which the Trump administration has broken the Constitution, while apparent, they've had some sort of interpretive claim that, oh, no, not really, because of weaselly arguments. This seems a bit more concrete in terms of, like, being something that's very specific in getting in the way of its spirit, if not its direct language. Also, just that, like, being president is incredibly exhausting emotionally and intellectually, and I don't think anyone who's been president for 8 years, particularly Barack Obama, would want to be a backup president, because it's like, no, I've already done that part of my life. But that being said, yes, Obama is quite the unifying figure. That has a lot of support within the Democratic Party electorate. But I do think it's time to build up, people to kind of take over the party and, hand it over to the next generation. And Biden's best case is that he's a transitional figure. And it'd be really good if he could pick someone as VP who he could kind of toss the baton to, who could be around for, a considerable amount of time, like someone like Nina Turner could do. So I definitely want Obama in the periphery, at least as an informal advisor to Biden. But vice president, I don't think that's the best pick.
I have nothing else to say, given that I had very little to say to begin with.
Okay, so yeah, this. I will say, like, I read a proposal, and of course this will never happen because she's said emphatically she doesn't want to run, but someone who was proposing, like, Biden should nominate Michelle Obama, and then, because she's super well liked, and then he could step down right after inauguration, and she would become president, and then Barack Obama, as first man, would basically be in the White House again, and a very close advisor to his wife, who is the new president. So that would be an interesting hypothetical. But Yeah, so I mean, of course, I have to go with Jason here because, like, I think you did. I mean, obviously, this is something you know a lot about. You had some good points about how, like, Nina Turner could kind of balance the interests of both the progressive and moderate wings of the Democratic Party, and then also, like, I think, yeah, I agree. Like, Obama is the kind of person where you kind of want to have his energy and charisma involved somewhere. So, like, if he was eligible to be vice president, I think he'd be a compelling pick. But the idea of, like, well, the the Trump administration does all this dirty shit, so why can't we? Is like kind of very counter to his philosophy and to what you would want from the opposition. So, like, yeah, that would be a problem.
Okay. So,
Okay, well, Jason, what are you picking now for stuffs and suches and things? I mean, if it was worse, I probably would have said Klobuchar.
yeah, it'd be hard to top that at this point.
Klobuchar or maybe Kamala Harris. Like, if I actually knew more about the specifics of her record at AG, then I definitely would pick Kamala Harris. Because it seems like progressives dislike her more. But Klobuchar, like, especially now that it's come out that she didn't prosecute the cop that killed George Floyd when he had another complaint. It's like, yeah, you're radioactive. You are completely radioactive, and no one will ever vote for you. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if this was Klobuchar's last term in the Senate, because just that's bad, and some other things have come out that aren't great. It's just like, yeah, Klobuchar, you're not bad, but I wouldn't be surprised if you just become radioactive over the next, like, year or two, and you end up losing. But I feel like that was definitely one of those, like, Ben or I didn't really have much of a chance there because neither of us have really thought about that much, whereas you've thought about that a hell of a lot. So, barring just bullshit luck, neither one of us had a chance there. That's why I just went for kind of like a dumb trolley angle, just so you could say your piece, because nothing I was going to say was going to have a chance.
Yeah, I mean, I would almost say, because, like, yeah, I probably would have, said someone like Harris or Warren or someone like that, but I think I wouldn't have had anything that interesting to say, so, like, and I would almost say that, given how things have played out over the last couple of months, where just kind of hanging back and doing the bare minimum has worked so well for Biden that, even though I'm really curious to see who he picks, and most people are, and who he picks may have some influence on my enthusiasm for voting for him, like the fact that his vice president is currently a blank slate is kind of good right now in this turbulent time, because you just know that, like, whoever he picks, no matter how good they are, there will be some backlash somewhere, whereas right now there's, like, it could be anybody, so his vice president is hypothetically the best possible choice for in each voter's mind.
I just really hope he doesn't pick Klobuchar. That would turn what should be like a somewhat easy victory into a nail biter.
Oh, he dodged a huge bullet by not announcing her earlier than Memorial Day.
Right.
Yeah. Because I feel like he probably would have had to just be like, oh yeah, I'm picking somebody else.
Yeah.
It's bad. I got to run it back and pick somebody else.
Yeah, because, like, the next thing that'll come out is, like, then another of his choices, it'll turn out that, like, they failed to deflect the giant meteor headed toward Earth when they had a chance, and then the next person will have failed to diffuse tensions with the aliens before they invaded us, and it'll just keep going down the list like that.
And yet somehow Wyoming will still vote for the giant meteor.
Yep. It's like, well, our population
So we
density
were
is pretty
playing
low. Like, some of us will survive.
So we were playing a bullshit game of the political machine, and Jason was playing as the meme candidate, which is the giant meteor. And like it turned into where like Wyoming became just this massive battleground where for the last 7 weeks of the campaign he had lost everywhere else because the giant meteor has really dumb policies like kill all the humans and give frogs the right to vote and make frogs our overlords and crap like that. But every other state was solidly like voting for me, except for Wyoming. So it became this huge like duel for who was going to win Wyoming, and the giant meteor somehow won Wyoming. But like the last 7 weeks were just constant. Like every speech, all the money, every ad is in Wyoming and nowhere else. It was rather dumb. Okay, Jason, what are you picking?
Okay, the next category is politics. And the prompt is, what is the worst foreign policy mistake made by a country other than the United States since 2008?
I mean, it just has to be Brexit, right? But I don't know how I would argue for that.
So I have two that I can argue, and I will pick which one based upon whoever comes up with something they want to argue. Because I have two that I can argue really well.
It's probably Brexit, but I don't think I could come up with an argument that would have a chance against whatever you're going to say. Ben, do you have anything that's coming to mind?
I don't know. Yeah, I'm still thinking.
I mean, I guess we'll just say Brexit, and Jason, I'll make you go first, because, again, this is one that you will have definitely thought a lot about, and I have not.
Okay.
So what is your pick?
Okay, so my pick is going to be Russia invading and annexing Crimea, and turning the world against it, particularly Europe and the U.S.
And would your second pick have been Brexit?
No, my second pick would have been Iran continuing its nuclear program.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so the reason why the Russian invasion of Crimea was the worst foreign policy decision made by a country other than the U.S. since 2008 is because it so thoroughly shocked the leaders and the political parties in Europe and the U.S. that it turned any hope of any pro-Russian policies from those countries completely out the window. You really hadn't seen territorial invasion of other countries in Europe really since World War II. And suddenly we found ourselves back in like the 1800s model of empire. And not just around the world, but literally in Europe after World War II, Europe thought it was done with that stuff. And you actually had quite a bit of pro-Russian sentiment in terms of policy in, say, the U.S. You had George W. Bush said, I looked into his eyes and I saw he was a good person, speaking of Putin. And, Barack Obama wanted to give U.S. relationships a new start. And the invasion of Crimea was like, oh no, we can't do this because Russia will not play by the international rules. And it will just invade its neighbors and refuse even to acknowledge that it had done so. I mean, it was just like, oh no, these are local militias that are doing this of their own free will. It wouldn't even acknowledge that it had invaded another country when it had invaded another country. And that was the beginning of a series of decisions where Russia was just like, no, we don't need the rest of the world. We're doing what we need, we're doing what's in our interest. Who cares what people think of us? And that was not a necessary decision. I mean, Putin had pretty strong control on power, and having a bunch of, having thousands of Russian soldiers die in Ukraine. I mean, even past the annexation of Crimea, but just the ongoing conflict there is just like, to what end? I mean, you have some nationalists in Russia who want to reunify with Ukraine, but to what extent is that worth anything? It's just, as opposed to just your national pride. And actually, Russia does not have a diversified economy. It's entirely dependent upon the price of oil, which during the coronavirus just fell precipitously. And so if other countries don't want to trade with you because they're mad at you because you don't follow international law, then you're screwed. And that was the beginning of a series of decisions. You had the invasion of Crimea, the war in Ukraine, the poisoning of the Russian national on British soil, the interference in the U.S. election in 2016, and fundamentally, like, supporting Russia in the U.S. has become, like, just unthinkable politically because of just how messed up Russia's actions have been in thwarting the international order and just good relations with its neighbors and other countries. And it didn't have to do that. It could have played by the rules and done the right thing and just kept its own power at home and good trade relations, and it had other countries that wanted to give Russia a good relationship and, welcome them continually into the international community to the extent that they were before 2014. And Putin decided, no, I don't care about any of that. I want Crimea. I'm taking it. I'll be an international pariah. Damn the consequences.
Well, you say that, but Putin has ultimately kind of gotten away with it because the rest of the world has started to lurch right in the last few years. And now Putin's kind of buddy-buddy with Donny T after he helped get Donny T elected. And you see a lot of other countries in the world like the UK and like Australia, and I'm not saying these places are friends with Russia, but you're definitely starting to see that a lot more places are starting to lurch to the right and become more authoritarian. The reason Brexit was the worst foreign policy decision by any country other than the U.S. since 2008, I think it's the worst foreign policy decision by anyone since 2008, is because the UK cut off its nose to spite its face. And it did that because a lot of Brexit leaders, like Nigel Farage and like Boris Johnson, blatantly lied to the electorate in the United Kingdom about how much being in the European Union was hurting the country, and we sent the European Union all of this money. Boris Johnson had it on the side of a bus, and it was just a blatant lie. And they campaigned for Brexit, but they had no idea how to actually make Brexit happen. So as soon as the British electorate voted for Brexit in a referendum that was not legally binding in any way, but was portrayed as being a legally binding thing, so it in effect kind of was legally binding. As soon as the country voted for Brexit, those guys peaced out and were like, okay, Brexit's been voted for, we don't know what to do now, bye-bye. And they resigned. So the economy of the United Kingdom went into the toilet for a couple of months because it was a huge shock of like, okay, one of the most powerful economies in the European Union just voted to leave the European Union. And a lot of the reasons that they voted to leave the European Union were these horrible, like, racist, nationalist, we don't want these immigrants coming to our country and taking our jobs. And it's that same right-wing rhetoric that you saw Trump use, and you saw leaders in Brazil use, and you see Putin use all the time. And it's the UK had absolutely no reason to leave the European Union, and it puts them at an economic disadvantage for them to leave the biggest trading bloc in the continent that they're a part of. Even though, yeah, they aren't necessarily actually like on continental Europe, they deliberately gave the finger to all of their closest trading partners for no reason. And the people that wanted to do it had no idea what to do because, kind of like Trump in 2016, they said whatever the hell they wanted because they probably didn't think they were going to win. And when they did win, they freaked out and, like, ran away for a while. And, like, yeah, Boris Johnson is back in power because he was foreign secretary and he's prime minister, and Boris Johnson did successfully lead the UK out of the European Union after 4 years of complete disaster. But it is such an unnecessary self-inflicted wound that is going to leave the United Kingdom in a bad spot economically for the foreseeable future for absolutely no reason. And yeah, Russia invading the Ukraine was really, really foolish. But as the rest of the world starts to lurch to the right, and as Putin finds a friend in the Trump administration, he's kind of gotten away with that behavior, because it's not like Putin is going to get ousted from power in Russia because of that. Whereas the United Kingdom is now kind of on its own and having to negotiate new trade deals with the European Union, and they're going to find out that, like, yeah, maybe we didn't have it as good in the European Union as we could have, but now we have this uncertain economic future, and we did not need to do this. And there was so much craziness and uncertainty that was going around after Brexit. People thought that, is Northern Ireland going to break off from the United Kingdom? Is Scotland going to try to get independence again? Is London going to break off from England? Like, there was so much craziness and so much uncertainty. There were some theories that, like, the United Kingdom is just going to fall apart. Yeah, that ultimately didn't happen, but that even being in the air supply for so long was just such an unnecessarily bad decision that will harm and has harmed the economic future of the country.
So the reason why I think that you're misreading the impact of Russian foreign relations, or the foreign relations in other countries responding to the Crimean invasion, is that, like, even though, yes, Trump is buddy-buddy with the Russians, Congress passed sanctions on Russia with a veto-proof majority because of just how unified the rest of the political establishment is against what Russia had done to undermine American institutions. And particularly the core institution of our democracy, our elections. And you had even Trump administration figures other than Trump were deploying troops closer to the Russian mainland in places like Poland and the Baltic states than they would have done otherwise. So even though, yeah, Trump is buddy-buddy with Putin, that doesn't actually impact the underlying U.S. foreign policy, even during the Trump administration. So, yeah, let alone, you know, the places that are actually in Russia's military shadow. One of the big reasons for the invasion of Ukraine by Russia was that Russia was upset that Ukraine was falling in the Western sphere of influence. Essentially, Ukraine was deciding whether or not to join, you know, a trade pact with Europe or with Russia, and it was leaning towards Europe, and Russia couldn't abide by that. Now, the impact of invading Ukraine is that all of the other former Soviet states who are kind of on the fence about, you know, who am I going to side with, are going to fall completely into the arms of the Europeans and the U.S. because, oh my God, Russia could invade us at any time. We need the help. So, I mean, it was thoroughly counterproductive what they were trying to do. So Brexit was dumb and unnecessary. It turned out not to be nearly as bad as it was predicted it might be, because there actually was a deal in place. You know, that Boris Johnson was able to agree with the European Union, and there was an avoidance of the no-deal Brexit, which would have been chaos. And, yeah, I mean, all of the things that you said about just how stupid Brexit was are true, and how harmful it can be in certain ways. But in some ways, it's better to have Britain out of the European Union than half in, half out, not truly convinced that it should be there. Having Britain just constantly there, just not knowing, should I stay? Should I go? Should I stay? Should I go? Like that's a dynamic in a relationship, diplomatic or personal, that you don't want to have. If your girlfriend's constantly asking whether she wants to leave you or not, it's not a good sign. And yeah, Europe's better off with a better girlfriend. They just are. I don't want to end on a sarcastic note, so let's see.
I'm thinking. Give me a second here. See, you've actually thought about this topic a lot. I literally just pulled that out of my ass. I need a second.
Okay.
I think it says more for Putin's image at home that he can be buddy-buddy with Donald Trump than any sanctions the U.S. has against Russia do. In the same way that the fact that Donald Trump had a meeting with Kim Jong-un increased his international profile a lot, because by having that meeting with Kim Jong-un, Donald Trump in effect said that the U.S. legitimized his government. By having that summit with North Korea, he legitimized his government. And I think by Trump being buddy-buddy with Russia, he legitimizes Putin in the eyes of some people, even though yes, there are harsh U.S. sanctions against Russia, the fact that Trump doesn't necessarily agree with those sanctions and he's still buddy-buddy with Putin kind of counteracts any effect that the sanctions are having in terms of how Russia is viewed in the world. And yeah, you could say that Europe needed a better girlfriend than the United Kingdom, but the United Kingdom, sometimes you just have to make relationships work, and the United Kingdom just needed to make that relationship work for the betterment of itself. And by leaving the European Union, it wasn't a foregone conclusion that they were going to leave the European Union. A lot of the agitation to leave the European Union was caused by the movement started by the Nigel Farages and the Boris Johnsons of the world. So if that movement gets defeated that time and those guys just kind of fade away, which they probably would have, because, the Scottish independence referendum happened, and then that hasn't really come up again. Since then. They could have done what they did after the Scottish independence referendum and kind of placate and then just kind of go on about their lives. So I think that I at least understand why Russia thought that they were trying to reassert their dominance in their region by invading Ukraine, because they've had designs on that for a really long time. And yes, it made him look bad on the international stage. And yes, there are still U.S. sanctions against Russia right now. And yeah, I don't know that much about them because I haven't followed them very closely. But I think he can still whip up nationalist fervor at home and conjure up the old idea of let's recapture the glory of the Soviet Union. Whereas the United Kingdom leaving the European Union, as soon as the Leave vote won, there were a lot of people that came out and were like, oh shit, I didn't actually want to leave. I just made a protest vote of hey, I want government reform to happen, which would have happened if they had voted to remain. If it had been a closed vote and been okay, it was 51-49 remain, so we obviously are staying in the European Union, but we need to have some negotiations and some concessions, because there is the sentiment that people want change. It was one of those things where all of a sudden, oh shit, we're leaving the European Union and we can't back out of this, and there were so many people that as soon as the vote happened, they didn't want to do that, but it was too late.
Referendums have consequences, that's for sure.
And I probably don't have anything else to say, but I'll wait and see what you say.
Of course. So the reason why that trade matters more to Russia than photo ops and the buddy-buddiness with Trump is that, domestically, a lot of the Russian citizens just are not that politically involved and are more concerned with their just day-to-day lives in a way that's even more so than the U.S. You have a lot of people who are just kind of checked out of politics in the U.S. in general. 2020 is the exception. 2016 was an exception as well. But in Russia, you just don't have a history of democracy stretching back that far. So they don't really think of the affairs of the state as the affairs of themselves and their country in the way that you see in the more developed Western democracies. Whereas their pocketbook matters to them just as much as to every American voter. And trade is really important to Russia because its economy is so dominated by the single oil sector. When it comes to Brexit and the impact that it has had on. Oh, I guess the other thing too is that like having Trump be buddy to Putin hurts Putin because of how detested Trump is internationally. So when you're looking at the other world leaders, they really think of Trump as a vile authoritarian, and in a way Putin is hurt by his association with Trump internationally as much as Trump is hurt by his association with Putin, especially after Lafayette Square and all of the stuff of this past month. But with Brexit, fundamentally, Britain is still going to trade with the European market. They're not going to get as favorable trade terms, but it's in Europe's best interest as much as it is in Britain's interest for that trading relationship to continue. Yeah, Brexit was really stupid, and it was a self-inflicted wound, but it was a self-inflicted wound that primarily hurt the internal functioning of British democracy, as opposed to its relationships with its neighbors, although that it also kind of pissed off its continental neighbors, but not in the same way that literally invading Crimea did for Russia. Brexit was dumb, but not nearly as dumb as inciting all of the harm that Russia has received diplomatically following its stupid, unnecessary, counterproductive decision to invade its neighbor Ukraine.
I have nothing else to say. All I'm going to do is repeat myself at this point.
Okay. Yeah, those are some pretty interesting arguments. Another one I thought of that would have been interesting afterwards, because like a lot of the ones I was thinking of were kind of, you could kind of knock for some of the reasons of like, this was a terrible thing to do, but we don't know what the consequences are going to be. So I was thinking like China's, kind of delay in, telling the rest of the world how serious the coronavirus was. That could potentially be pretty bad. But anyway, I think those are both really good choices, and kind of ones I thought of too, but probably couldn't have argued as well. And they both had some parallels of like we're doing this kind of contrarian thing, to be tough and independent that ends up hurting us more than it hurts anyone else. Aside from Ukraine, but I think Jason won me over on this one because, like, I think, Zach did a good job of showing that Brexit was like a dumb decision that like a lot of people didn't take seriously enough, but like I think Jason showed how like the consequences of like terrifying your neighbors are like to the point where they're just like, oh, you could invade us at any moment, like that's not good at all, like are a little more severe, whereas like the UK faced some bad consequences, but they still have like enough of a history of like respectful relations that they were able to finally get a deal, even if it was really hard to get it, and they're still going to be able to negotiate trade even if it'll be at a disadvantage, whereas like Russia was like already starting from a precarious position and then really deeply soured relations with the very countries that wanted to project influence over.
Like
But
one of
that
the
was a pretty
points that
close couple of topics there.
Yeah, like one of the other points that I had, but just forgot to mention because it escaped my mind, was that like early on there was this interview with this Russian mother of a Russian soldier who died in Ukraine, who was like, yeah, we buried my son, but we couldn't even like acknowledge that like he died fighting for his country because Putin didn't acknowledge that we were at war. And yeah, for her and the dead soldiers' family members, that's a pretty profound thing to have to grapple with. That your son died fighting for their country in a war that the country itself didn't acknowledge was happening, or at least its government anyway. So to give you time to think about the next prompt, I will say we'll do one in entertainment. And what is the best rock song of all time?
I'll say Voodoo Child Slight Return by Jimi Hendrix.
There are numerous options. I'm just deciding which one would be best. I'll say Sympathy for the Devil by the Rolling Stones.
Okay. So, yeah, Voodoo Child Slight Return. And the reason for the strange title is because Jimi Hendrix has 2 songs called Voodoo Child on the same album, Electric Ladyland, but the second one has Slight Return in parentheses because they're both like have similar lyrical themes, but the music is different. But Voodoo Child Slight Return is like the quintessential rock guitar song. It's like kind of the apex of what you can do with the guitar in a rock song. But it's, even though it's wild and crazy and out there, it's also like perfectly fits. You have this intro that really grabs you, and then you kind of ramp up with the effects. You have your verses, and then this solo that is just kind of this fascinating use of not only the guitar but the recording technology, where you have making use of the different the stereo effects, so that like if you're listening with headphones, you'll hear the guitar coming in from one side and then going down to the other side and back and forth, and just like a really immersive audio experience. And then you have some really cool imagery. Like the lyrics are pretty short, so I'll just read the whole bunch. So while I'm standing next to a mountain, I chop it down with the edge of my hand, pick up the pieces and make an island, might even raise a little sand, because I'm a voodoo child. Lord knows I'm a voodoo child. And then later the second part is, I didn't mean to take up all your sweet time. I'll give it right back to you one of these days. And if I don't meet you no more in this world, then I'll meet you in the next one, and don't be late, because I'm a voodoo child. Lord knows I'm a voodoo child. So like, really kind of fascinating imagery about like kind of this idea of like a very independent and somewhat mystical figure with kind of roots in some of the old, African voodoo culture. And then I especially like the line of, if I don't meet you no more in this world, then I'll meet you in the next one, and don't be late, of like, I'm burning bright, and I don't know how long I'll be around, but I'm still gonna leave an impact, and I'll still have this legacy that carries on beyond me. Is kind of how I interpret that, especially given the fact that Jimi Hendrix died at age 27 and still, is this, left this monumental legacy. But, so it's got the interesting lyrics and everything, but the main thing is just that the guitar playing really takes full advantage of what you can do with the instrument of the electric guitar. It's instantly recognizable. It's something that people have tried to cover, but really the only person who has really succeeded in covering it well is Stevie Ray Vaughan, because it is a very difficult song to cover. But a lot of people have like found ways to like quote parts of the guitar playing in other songs and inspire some really cool things from that. So it's just like just a real monumental creative achievement and just a really amazing song.
Okay, so the reason I think Sympathy for the Devil by the Rolling Stones is the greatest rock song of all time is because it's the perfect marriage. But I think for a rock song to be a really good rock song, it has to have the total package. It has to be interesting musically, it has to be interesting lyrically, and it has to be a pleasure to listen to, and it has to take you on a journey. And Sympathy for the Devil does all of those things. So it opens with that iconic little drum part, and then you just hear the random like "ow, ow" in the background as you're getting to the first verse, and that just immediately grabs you. Like, okay, this song is going to be something. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to be something really interesting, and I just have to sit down and I have to listen to this. And then the first lyric is, "Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a man of wealth and taste. I've been around for a long, long year. Stole many a man's soul and faith." And it goes throughout that, and you hear, because the person that's talking to you is obviously the devil, which you get that from the title, but the lyrics go over all of the bad things that man has done and all of the things that the devil has been present for. Like, "I stuck around St. Petersburg when I saw it was a time for a change. I killed the Tsar and his ministers. Anastasia screamed in vain. I rode a tank, held the general's rank while the blitzkrieg raged and the body stank." I would say all of the lyrics, but I don't have them in front of me, so I'm just saying what I can say off of memory right now. But it's such this interesting ride from beginning to end that just it picks you up right away and it never stops, and you're just so. It's like a good movie. Which some of my favorite songs, what I think are the best songs, are those songs that like once you start listening to it from the first second to the last second, it totally grabs your entire imagination, and you are completely fixated on the song and everything that's going on, and you can see yourself going on the journey that the song is taking you on. And when Mick Jagger sings each lyric and describes each scene, like, you can envision yourself in that scene for like that split second of like in your mind when you sing "Anastasia screams in vain," like, once you've listened to the song enough times, your mind will hear a scream in it, because it's like you can just envision that scene because it's so vividly portrayed, and the music is so perfect in the background, and it just fits the vibe of the song. So I think when you think of a quintessential rock song, it has to have all of the pieces, and Sympathy for the Devil has all of those pieces that you want in a rock song. I don't really have any way. I don't really have a way to criticize Voodoo Child, so I would just say that I think Voodoo Child is also a good song, and I don't really have any way to criticize it.
Yeah, I really like Sympathy for the Devil as well. Yeah, I think it's got some interesting lyrics, and it has like an actual good Keith Richards guitar solo, which is a very rare thing because he didn't play solos that often. But comparing Keith Richards' guitar solo to a Jimi Hendrix guitar solo, like, yeah, it's night and day. Like, almost no one can compare to Jimi Hendrix. So, like, I think this is a song that has like some really interesting lyrics, and the music is good. It's like kind of a little bit innovative the way they chose this different style of rhythm for the song, but like where I think Voodoo Child stands so tall is that it's really doing something, and this is like kind of what Jimi Hendrix did throughout his entire career, and this song just particularly exemplifies it, is you're taking something that no one had even imagined was possible before, and doing it so well in a way that sounds so complete and so good that it just became the standard for rock and roll afterwards. Of like, like before electric Ladyland came out, people would have been like, oh, I didn't even think you could do that with a guitar. And then after like Electric Ladyland came out and people listened to Voodoo Child, they're like, that is what I want to do with the guitar. And that influence like is still like, it still stands up as a singular achievement today, but yet something that people are continually trying to emulate, even though it's impossible to replicate. So like I think these are both excellent songs, but if you're looking at like the pinnacle of rock and roll, I think Voodoo Child really stands in a unique spot.
And I guess the last thing I will say is, if we were arguing over most influential song, then I would agree with all of the points that you have made of how influential Voodoo Child was. And you said Voodoo Child stands in a unique spot in rock and roll. Well, I think Sympathy for the Devil also stands in a unique spot in just how well it flows lyrically, and how well the image and how well like the music and the lyrics fit together to paint this just complete picture of everything that the song is. And yeah, you can have a lot of songs that have interesting music or have interesting lyrics, but if the music doesn't necessarily accentuate the lyrics in the way that it does in Sympathy for the Devil, you don't find yourself fully immersed in the music. And I think what makes Sympathy for the Devil a special song is that perfect blend and mix of everything coming together fully encases you in the imagery and the scenes and the sound. And you feel like you're in all of these places that Mick Jagger talked about during the song, and it's really, really special for that to happen, because you don't usually get that with music. Like, I'll have some of my favorite songs that have really good lyrics, and I will sing along to every time I listen to them in the car or every time I'm somewhere else, and I know what those lyrics mean to me, but I don't necessarily imagine the song doesn't set the scene for me the way that Sympathy for the Devil does. And I think because it's so unique for music to be able to do that, like that makes it transcend the art form of, like, this isn't just a song, this is a complete sensory experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I will say, like, a lot of the songs that I really like, the music is more important than the lyrics, and that is the case here with Voodoo Child. But I think, like, Jimi Hendrix was also an excellent lyricist, and so, like, what he's like, the song does actually have some compelling lyrics that really do economically, it's short compared to the guitar part, but that show, like, kind of the essence of Jimi Hendrix and kind of the way, he saw himself as this character who's, kind of struggling in this position, in this kind of larger than life position that he's kind of been placed into as a rock star, and how it's, kind of this battle between the coolness of it all, but then kind of the unknowability of being in this kind of removed place. It's more like, yeah, it is more up to interpretation than the lyrics in Sympathy for the Devil, which are a little more concrete. But yeah, I think it does flow in very well with the guitar playing, and kind of adds some additional significance to, like, the character of the person that's creating this incredible soundscape, if that made any sense.
Okay, well, I have nothing more to say. Jason, what is your ruling?
Okay, I'm going to give this one to Zach. I think that he, particularly the lyrics and just how evocative and descriptive they are, and like how they tie into, like, all of these different things. Like, it's kind of like Zach's pick had multiple things that it was pointing out that were very interesting, whereas at least lyrically, Ben just kind of had the one, and it was so short that we read it, in a very brief period of time. Yeah, both very good picks. I did think that, like, oh, don't keep me waiting in the lyrics for Ben's song rendition of, or version of the Voodoo Child one from Hendrix. Just like, well, that could be interpreted as, like, I hope you die soon, which, like, I know that's probably not what they were going for, but, like, I don't know. I don't know about that. But yeah, two good choices argued well.
Okay. Yeah, see, I can never fucking win these because, like, you guys just both respond more to lyrics and story in your music, and I'm always more into the music, so I just never have a chance. But I feel like that one was at least somewhat close.
Well, as soon as you went into the lyrics like that, I was like, oh, god damn it. I was going to knock Voodoo Child for not having that interesting of lyrics, but now I can't because, like, oh, yeah, those are really interesting lyrics that I had never seen that meaning in. Fuck, now I have to really, really lean into mine because I can't knock that anymore.
Yeah. But it does, yeah, I mean, even though I have to be a little salty after each of these, like, I don't mind that much because just the opportunity to talk passionately about music I like is rewarding.
Yeah. Okay, well, I've actually argued in every single one of these rounds, so I would like to judge one and take a break from arguing.
Okay.
Sure. I mean, I'm getting pretty close to my retirement point because we've been at it for quite a while. But I think one more would be good, and it's good to give Zach a chance to judge too. So I guess the prompt that I think would be fun to argue with you, Ben, is what is the best silver lining of the Trump era? So specifically, I'm not asking for things that, like, were good that the Trump administration did, but that the positive outcomes of bad things that they did, meaning kind of like the way that other people responded to the bad things that they did that were kind of good.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I've got an idea, but I want to think about it a little bit more before I, like, say it, because I'm
Sure.
I really wanted to just go with the trial on that last one because that is, like, the highest, like, just classic rock song on my 256 list. But I thought it would have been way too easy for you to knock how that isn't really a rock song, and it doesn't, like, kind of fit the vibe of what you would expect a classic rock song to be.
yeah.
Okay, so the next and final prompt for this episode is what is the best silver lining of the Trump era? And specifically for this one, we're not looking for good things that Trump did as much as positive reactions by other people to the bad things that the Trump administration or Trump himself has done.
Yeah. And
So, good.
Good. Yeah. So my answer is that it made people, like, see that that they need to be politically involved, or else dumb stuff like the Trump administration can happen.
Okay. And my answer is a greater appreciation for the norms and basic beliefs and assumptions about how our system of government should operate. Essentially, the things that were good about our system that we took for granted before.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess I'll go first. So I think these are both somewhat similar topics, but yeah, I think, like, when Trump announced that he was going to be a candidate in the 2016 race, like, myself and a lot of other people just kind of looked at that and was like, that's funny, like, he'll be the front runner for a while because people know who he is, but then another serious candidate will emerge and he'll fall to the wayside, as has happened previously with candidates like, for example, Rudy Giuliani, who, like, people knew who he was because of 9/11, but then, like, he didn't go anywhere as a candidate, or, stuff like that. And so, it just became increasingly, like, shocking to people, like the fact that he kept going and going and made it all the way to the presidency. And then, some of the stuff that he's done as president and with his administration. And, just kind of this idea that, like, so many of us didn't even think it was possible to have someone with no political experience who can't even form a complete sentence ascend all the way to the presidency based on the back of just a little bit of angry populist rhetoric, is, pretty, it's shocking, but, like, it's kind of a wake-up call, things like this have almost happened before in history. Like, I was kind of, like, even though I already knew about it, like, I didn't kind of realize the significance of, like, how in the early 30s, like in the Kansas governor's race, like John Brinkley, the goat gland doctor, the guy who became famous for quack medicine, where he'd put goat testicles in people to supposedly cure infertility or whatever, or
at least claiming to have done so.
Yeah, exactly. It was a complete bullshit, and this guy was a total con artist, and yet he almost won a write-in candidate for the Kansas governorship. And it's like, imagine how, that's one of those things where you think, that could never really have happened, and that was a long time ago. And then you see, like, Trump winning, and you're like, oh no, this is something very real that can totally happen in 2016, because people are disillusioned with the current leadership. There aren't the candidates for the Republican Party aren't that strong, and there's kind of like this climate where people will just, believe what they want to hear rather than question it, and people aren't serious enough to, like, stop this from happening before it gets too far. And so I think you're seeing, like, people are kind of waking up and realizing, no, we have to really participate in democracy to ensure that this doesn't happen again. And, like, you're seeing, examples, like, even recently, like, even though you might question, like, some of the specifics, like, with the recent demonstrations in the wake of the death of George Floyd, like, people are saying, like, we've sat here and done nothing and nothing happened, and so now we're going to really go out there and give it our best shot. And, like, you're actually seeing some changes come to it from that. And you're finally seeing, like, oh, people are actually, like, committed to going out and voting for Biden, even though he's not a really exciting candidate. Like, you still see that, like, he's qualified and can do a competent job, whereas, like, Trump obviously isn't. And people are, like, actually caring because they see what happens when they don't care and let a guy like Trump into the White House.
Okay. So the reason why the greater appreciation for the good aspects of our system that we had taken for granted is the best silver lining of the Trump era is that, like, there were a lot of qualities in a leader that we just never thought about because we took them for granted and were just obviously what you would want someone like a president to be. And by no means are they automatic or by default. After 9/11, you had George W. Bush, tell people, hey, don't blame American Muslims for this. They didn't do this. And actually tried to unite the country following the crisis, and actually did so, at least initially, fairly effectively. And it's figures like Bush that have troubled histories for other reasons that are seeing their popularity rise during the Trump era, because they were actually, trying to do the best that they could, and actually cared about people and tried to make things better, and as Bush said, was a uniter, not a divider. Now, I still think the war in Iraq was a horrible decision, and I don't think Neutral Left Behind worked out very well, and I could go down the list of a bunch of things that I disagree with the George W. Bush administration about. But nonetheless, just having a leader that just is so, it is literally an authoritarian that attacks the basic institutions like the free press, like the courts, like the checking authority of Congress, who is so narcissistic that only cares about himself, doesn't do anything to try to lessen the conflict in our country, quite the opposite, who just constantly tries to ramp it up always, just makes you really appreciate, oh yeah, most presidents aren't like this. In fact, almost none are, and it's so much better to have someone who has the qualities that actually can comfort the nation during a time of crisis rather than inflame it. Just the whole idea that oh yeah, we live in a system of checks and balances, and those checks and balances are really important, which you wouldn't think that much about unless you had an authoritarian leader who is threatening to send the military to quash domestic protests. And the whole idea that, yeah, you're not supposed to benefit off the presidency. Presidents put their stuff in a blind trust, and there's not a law that says you have to do it. And we never thought about the emoluments clause. Gee, this is part of the Constitution no one ever thinks about. But I guess we have to think about it now. And you just all of these aspects of the American constitutional system that we took for granted as just obvious. We have a renewed appreciation for these kind of process and just basic legitimacy ideals that Trump has so thoroughly trampled upon.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think there is some of that, but I think that's a much more nuanced aspect of things that I don't think as many people are really thinking about, and that I think is a much more mild reaction than what I'm talking about, because it kind of I don't think people are going to be oh, it's yeah, people do have a more favorable opinion of Bush and Obama now, for example, but I don't think people are just going to be oh, we're any average less controversial politician is just going to be great now because we appreciate these little things. I think no matter who is president, people are still going to excoriate and eviscerate them for their failings, even if their failings are much milder, because that's just the climate of politics, is that people's emotions run high, and no matter what you do, you're going to piss people off and cause lots of controversy. And so yeah, it would be nice to have someone who you could take to task based on their policy alone and not their complete disregard for things like the Constitution and truth and basic human decency. But I think it's more that people are saying Trump is so bad that we just never imagined things could go this far off the rails. So I think when we get back, assuming we get back to a more normal presidential situation, like, I don't think people are gonna, like, there may be a little more appreciation for what we have, but I think people are going to find other things to focus their negativity upon, and like we're going to kind of lose sight of the fact that like these little things are important and worth recognizing. But I think what we will see is that the next time someone like Trump comes along, instead of treating him like a joke, people will say this person is a real threat, and we need to make sure that we not let this happen now in order that it doesn't become what it became in 2016. Like, it's more just a reckoning that like someone who violates these norms so egregiously can still ascend to a power that that these, you know, even though these things are vital to preserving the system, like they're not vital to you know, being allowed to be part of the system, because there's enough people that will vote for someone who flies in the face of all of this. And so you know, that we need to take these people, you know, as seriously as like something that, you know, is a legitimate threat, and not just like, oh, that could never happen, so we don't need to worry about it, and I don't really need to pay attention to politics. Like, no, your inaction has serious consequences.
So I actually do think that a lot of voters will actually be relieved when politics returns to something akin to normal. Even if that normal was, you know, the Obama administration, when we had plenty of problems in the country. But you didn't have a president who was actively trying to make horrible existential crises for the country worse. It's different to say like, oh yeah, and I do think people will recognize that oh, this is the difference between a president who means well but doesn't do enough to fix a problem that that they needed to do, or a president who actively is trying to inflame a horrible situation. It's like, and yeah, I mean, I think there are plenty of people who once Biden is elected, if he is elected, will be like, yes, I don't have to constantly pay attention to politics anymore. Finally, I can breathe easy without being terrified of what's going to be on the front page of the newspaper. Because what did Trump do today? We have no idea. It could be anything. Because he's not bounded by empathy or reason or decency. And I think those things we will have a greater appreciation for in our presidents, even though I'm sure our presidents will always be held to an impossible standard. I think we'll be a bit more understanding when they fail to meet those expectations.
I don't think we will. I think we're just like, I mean, because like I you know, that's just the American tradition though for the last few decades, is just being horrible to whoever's in office as much as possible. Like there was, you know, Obama's like this, you know, nice, fairly, you know, he's a nice, well-meaning person who's trying to do his best, and everyone on the right is like, he's a communist, he hates America, he's trying to sell the country down the river. And before that, Bush, you know, he's a nice guy trying to do his best. Everyone's like, he's this horrible warmongering person who you know, is committing war crimes and abusing his power in all sorts of ways. And Clinton before that, it's like, well, he's this immoral, lying person who's you know, abusing his power and having blowjobs in the Oval Office, and just the worst person ever. You know, like it doesn't, you know, it doesn't matter who the president is. Everyone, you know, the other side is going to be absolutely horrible to them. I think what, you know, if Biden is in office, everyone on the right will say, you know, he's a socialist, he's selling the country down the river. He's an idiot. He's experiencing mental decline. And the same thing, if a moderate Republican is elected to office, people will say, well, he's a fascist. He supports, he's a racist. He's supporting policies that kill innocent people. You can't stop it. Like, that's gonna be the conversation, and everyone else is, going to check out from it like as much as possible, but you can't avoid it. So I think what's more important is that people will be vigilant to say, like, okay, the state of conversation in the political sphere is still really toxic, but it was so bad when you had Trump in there that we at least know what to look for to prevent it from getting to that abysmal level again, or to try to prevent it from getting to that abysmal level again, and we can keep it at a normal state of crap instead of like a special pit of Tartarus that we're in right now.
So, while I think that you kind of accurately described what the overall dynamics might be, I think that there will be a lot of individual people who will have greater pause for, before they call someone a fascist, for instance, because, we had an actual fascist.
Yeah, but you've got people out there, like, if you look on Twitter, you can find ultra progressives calling moderately progressive people fascists for telling black people that they can't burn down local businesses.
So I don't think Twitter is reflective of national public opinion. I think Twitter is where the most vocal people of any opinion go, and it ends up being very non-representative.
But the news is also that way,
Yeah.
All right. I'm just gonna say, Jason, you lost, because I think what this comes down to, and sorry to cut this off, but I think what this comes down to is there's the very idealistic view of the world that you're trying to present, that people are going to stop and be analytical, and they're going to appreciate what makes a good president, what doesn't make a good president. And then there's just the stark reality that Ben is arguing for, and I just find myself as the judge in this and putting everything aside, like,
Sure.
Ben is arguing for something that is actually realistic in the world, whereas you're kind of arguing for something that is the ideal we should hold presidents to. That just isn't going to happen. So I just have to give it to Ben, because he's making an argument that is more grounded in the reality that we live in, and less in the ideals that we should strive for.
Yeah,
that's fine. That's fine. You cut me off. I didn't really have that more to say, but yeah, go ahead.
it's kind of funny because
that speaks to me.
Because of course it speaks to you. I knew I was kind of on good footing there, but it's kind of sad because usually I want to take the hopeful and idealistic track, but here it was like, I've got to go full pessimism. It just seems more like the way to go on this argument, and it didn't hurt that I was speaking to someone a judge who that would speak to.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's like sometimes you just got to know your audience. And I knew my audience for the best rock song argument was Jason, so if I lean really heavily into the lyrics, I'm probably going to win.
Yeah.
Whereas you knew your audience for this was me, and if you go for the more cynical, like realism argument, that's probably going to win. Because, Jason, I don't disagree with you that should happen, and it should make people think about what ideals we're looking for in a president, what ideals we should hold our politicians to.
And I think
that's just not going to happen.
Well, I think it will happen to some extent, but it'll be more amongst a smaller and more engaged set of the populace, and the for the most part, a lot of people just aren't going to engage enough to really consciously think about that. which is
Which was
unfortunate.
kind of the point I was trying to argue, but wasn't going to be convincing enough.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if what would be really positive to come out of it is just, like, I think the most positive thing that can come out of it is that people just pay attention to what is going on and they realize that, like, I can't just check out of politics and my vote actually matters, and I can't just think that someone who's really crazy will never win because the Trump administration proved that anything is possible.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't just assume that crazy is going to lose. So I was doing a little bit of research, and Brinkley won over 30% of the vote in 2 straight elections and lost by like 2 or 3 points in 1930 and 1932.
Yeah.
Like 1930, he got 180,000 votes as a write-in candidate, and then 1932, he got like over 200,000 votes actually on the ballot.
Yeah, and in the write-in one, the only reason he didn't win is because they saw that he was going to win, and so at the last minute they made a really specific and poorly publicized rule about how you had to write specifically John R. Brinkley or whatever, and any other writing of his name was invalid, or else he would have won. Which is, as Jason and I discussed earlier, like, it's one of those subversions of democracy where you're like, it's horrible that they had to do this, but it was probably for the best.
Yep.
Because it's one of those things where, like, yeah, if they hadn't subverted democracy in that way, we would have had goat testicle man as governor.
Yeah.
What's worse, subverting democracy or having goat testicle man?
Yeah. Good grief. Yeah, because, like, as you know, as much as Trump is worse than just about anyone who had a realistic shot at the presidency, like, someone like Brinkley would be even worse. Of course, like, the only reason he was really running was so that he could basically, like, pass laws that would be more favorable to his shady business. But it's like someone like that who is, you know, because it's like Trump, like, he's horrible and he disregards all the norms of the office, but he at least, like, has experience of, like, being a public figure and running a business, so he knows, like, how to at least, you know, not, you know, leave everything like a literal smoldering wreckage. It's just going to be a figurative smoking wreckage. But someone like Brinkley, where he's basically a con artist, and, you know, like, things might actually be a literal smoking wreckage when he's done.
Yep. I mean, Kansas. Sometimes we can be amazingly progressive, and other times we can be the most backward state in the entire union.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's kind of like our weather. We only deal in extremes.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much.